I said, I can fool my parents, I can fool my family, but I cannot fool you. And I said, I needed heart transplant. It just so happens that the car that's coming against me is a police car. And I'm like swerving immediately. I'm like, swerve. The police turns their blue lights. I'm like, I gotta run. I had some drugs on me. I had them all would keep them right here in my boxers. And I remember rolling down the window and tossing the drugs out.
You can make a movie out of this. I mean, I can see it. So you're telling me your future wife picks up the ticket
and says, please pray for my brother Samuel, who's deep into drugs, that God will save him and bring him to Dallas. I called my pastor and I told him, and he was very, very upset. And I called my father-in-law and I told him what happened. Wow. And then I flew to Tennessee to tell my mom and dad. And my God, the wrath of Alexander Bistrian. It was very, very hard. Many people suggested an abortion. And I have friends within that same Romanian context that did that so they could save face, so they could pretend because they were the son of a pastor or the son of a religious person. I got my first pair of shoes and I'm like, wow. I must have been 9 years old. And it was special. It was very special, just like the moment when I got to eat my first slice of pizza, and I was like, wow, what is this, pizza? Or the first hot dog with ketchup, the first week when we came to the U.S. We were the target of so much bullying. People had no idea where Romania was even on a map. So here I have a brand new baby. I have a brand new marriage. And I have this guy that's addicted to drugs. And I said, hey, come live with me. I want you to break away from that lifestyle. I'm actually wearing my Romanian shirt today to honor my first Romanian podcast interview. So this is actually really cool.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Bora. I am the presenter of this podcast called Make Your Life Count. What we're about, we're a podcast produced by Charity Cup with the name of Making Life Count because that's our motto. And the reason we call it that, and the reason that's our motto, we believe that individuals should invest in two things that last eternally, which is people, God, people's souls, and God. And that's been our goal with Charity Cup, to help people serve in that capacity. So this podcast is about featuring those type of stories and people that are doing that in our life. And it could be in many different capacities. It could be being a pastor, being a missionary, being a regular nurse or doctor or engineer, to being an entrepreneur, but always keeping that eternal perspective in mind. So that's what these interviews are about. That's what these programs are about. So today we have an awesome guest with us that I think embodies this in an awesome way on probably a few different levels. First of all, as an entrepreneur, but also from a ministry standpoint, as far as I know him, and he'll tell us more about it. Some of you may have seen him here and there, if not on Facebook, maybe on TV, or maybe on some report done by some station in Romania or otherwise, Good Morning America, for instance. So without any further ado, please help me welcome a dear friend of mine and the founder of ROMA BOOTS, Samuel Bistrian.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. What an honor to be on your show, on your podcast.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for taking the invitation and honoring us with your invitation. I know you and I got to know each other over the years, and kind of casually here and there. But obviously, a lot of people know you probably from Roma Boots. I mean, that's how I came across your story, not really knowing each other personally. But then I got to know you better and found out you're an awesome believer. I think you're a bold believer, and that's inspiring to me and to many others. So, Sam, we want to start, and we usually start with sort of the end in mind, and then we'll kind of jump back from the very beginning. So, as of right now, if you would maybe tell us a few things you're involved in, and kind of some of a little bit of your resume, if you would.
Yeah, well, I was born in Romania, like you, Arad, or the same region. I'm actually wearing my Romanian shirt today to
All
honor my
right.
first Romanian podcast interview. So this is actually really cool. I'm excited
We
to.
feel honored.
Yeah, no, I said, you know what? I normally wear a black shirt, but let me wear my Romanian blouse this time. I haven't worn it in a long time. So yeah, just I even have my little Romanian hat here for my Roma boots, but I'll get into that in a little while with you. So my resume, I would say I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a child of God, and I'm a entrepreneur. So I started, my life in the U.S. when I was 8 years old in 1990 after the revolution, ended in Romania. But prior to that, obviously, I was born in 1982, small village as the ninth of 12 people in we've talked about this before, but close to Ineo, the village that I was born in, actually was about 100 people. Of all 12 siblings, I was the only boy that was born there in Benesht, and you know, got my first pair of rain boots when I was 6 years old, handed down from older siblings. They were a faded orange. I recall the day I got them, and I knew how I could run outside and play in the snow and the mud and not worry about my feet getting wet. And when I was 8, like I said, communism fell, and we had the privilege of migrating to the U.S., all of us. So we moved from Romania, from a tiny village, to the third largest city in the U.S., to Chicago. And that's when my life, started here in the US, and then from there to Tennessee, and then to Texas, where I've been for the last 25 years in Dallas, Texas. And this is where I learned fashion, I learned retail. This is where I went to school, Bible school, university, and this is where I met my wife and started a family. So here I am in
Yep.
Texas. Yeah, so
Before we kind of dive in that journey, because it sounds really cool, by the way. So right now you are the founder and the CEO of Roma Boots, which I believe was featured. I know I was on Good Morning America quite a few times. You made some amazing friends, I think, along the way. Somewhere from the Robinsons, I've seen. If you want to say a couple words about that, and then
yeah,
maybe your
sure.
foundation.
Yeah, so actually, Roma Boots, and as you said, I'm the CEO and founder of Roma Boots, but also the executive director of Roma Foundation. So the way it works, Roma Boots sells a pair of boots, and for every pair that we sell, we donate a pair to Roma Foundation. Roma Foundation will partner with NGOs like Charity Cup, World Vision, Convoy of Hope, and distribute these boots all around the world. So this journey actually has been a 15-year journey, and I don't want to jump the gun here, but yeah, I never thought, when I started Roma Boots, that we would be donating $10 million worth of boots in 35 countries around the world in 15 years. And God has been so gracious to us, and He's allowed that to happen. And for that, I'm humbled, and the people that I've met and I continue to stay in touch with, and obviously, yeah, the opportunity to appear on some national networks, MSNBC, Today Show, Good Morning America, and even share my story at Harvard, and some of these were in School of Business, some major. I never sought that. I never, had a drive to. We never even had a publicist. I mean, this was all organic. It just got opening up doors. My motivation was love, and that's why Roma is named Roma. Roma is amor spelled backwards. Amor is love, as you know. So, and then Roma, Romania, Roma, the Gypsies. It has like a effect of, or some. It has three different meanings, but the heart behind it was love. So my background prior to that, I mean, I can allude to this a little bit, was fashion. So I was actually working for Neiman Marcus, a department store here in Dallas, where actually it started. And while I was working at Neiman Marcus, had the privilege of meeting Blake Mikulski, who founded Tom's Shoes. And I remember meeting with him and saying, hey, have you considered doing anything for kids that live in cold and wet climates? And he didn't really seem interested. He was focused on Argentina. Tom's was relatively new. It was only 3 years old at the time. I think he founded Tom's in 2006, 2009 is when I met Blake. And I think he started doing some things in Africa, but I knew, and you know, how important rain boots are for kids that live in cold and wet climates. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so he didn't seem interested, and basically, my heart just started beating really fast. I'm like, why don't I do it? Or I heard this voice like, why don't you do it? And I'm like, no, I have no experience. I sell fur coats at Neiman Marcus. I don't sell footwear. You know, that's not necessarily my background. We were in the middle of a recession. If you remember, in 2009, the housing market burst, and it was
Yeah.
really tough. And so I said, God, if it's really something that is from you, you know, just give me the drive to do it, and let me step out in faith. And that's what happened. I stepped out in faith. So that moment, that decision was made, everything started to connect. Everything started to come together. And I remember I had this motivation that I couldn't stop. I remember willing to do anything that it took to make this work. But there's a lot that kind of led me to where I even wanted to do something meaningful prior to that, because I knew I was given an opportunity that many people risk their lives for, and that is to come to America, to have uh, the freedom to do anything that you want to. People die, you know, we've seen people that cross the border to come here. And we came here, thank God, you know, because this door was open. We came as refugees. And my mom instilled in us from the day we got here, and my dad, they said, you know, you have a purpose. Don't squander this. Don't waste this. And so we knew that we had to do something with the freedom that we had to be able to live in the greatest country in the world. And so there was a calling, and there was a drive, and there was a sense of duty. There was a sense of a moral obligation, I would say, to do something that would help people back home in Romania. Now, I didn't know it was going to turn out to be, you know, a global endeavor, which praise God for that. But yeah, it's been really cool, and I'm just so grateful for it.
Sam, that I think that's an awesome synopsis, and we'll come back to this because again, we could probably do a few podcasts on the story. Just on the business itself is probably, I love business in general, and we could probably, yeah. But you know, I think we're going to run into similar themes that some of my other guests have brought up, and the parent side of things. So I don't know. I have a guess. We're going to talk about that briefly because you already mentioned it. So take us back to kind of who Sam is and where the journey started. I think you already previewed that a little bit. Um, Maybe how old were you when you came to the States?
Yeah, so again, I was 8 years old. As a kid, you know, always had this sense that Jesus would return in my lifetime. I don't know why, you know, but as a kid, I remember I loved the Lord. I grew up in a Christian household. My mom and my dad were both Christians. You know, my mom was, I guess she was born into a Christian home, but prior, or when she was little, her parents were Orthodox. They converted to Christianity. My dad lost his father in the war, so he grew up without a father. Um, he got saved later on in his life. You know, he was, you know, he used to drink and do whatever other people that don't follow Jesus do. And somebody in our village shared a gospel with him, and he became saved, and he became pretty radical. He not only, you know, started preaching the word, you know, but going to other villages and doing that. Met my mom, got married, and wanted to have a lot of kids, as many as God gives us, hence 12 kids, 6 boys, 6 girls. And so I grew up in that environment, where we would go to church every Sunday. We would pray before every meal. We would pray when we would wake up, and, you know, interesting story is when I was, probably 6 or 7 years old, everybody kind of left the house. They were gone somewhere and I was home by myself. And I'm like, where's everybody? I guess I took a nap outside in the yard, and everybody came back home, and I'm like, where's everybody at? I thought the rapture had occurred, so I was always like, they're gone. Jesus. So I had that fear, in a, I would say in a negative sense, but I don't know why that always stuck with me. And I remember it was during the revolution where Romania has some beautiful sunsets, and the skies would turn red, and I would look up at the skies, and I would just be like, Jesus is coming back. Jesus is coming back, and then of course the revolution took place. Ceausescu, gets executed, I believe, and then we have the privilege of coming here, and man, what an opportunity that was. We didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity, we didn't have all that. So to go from this village into the third largest city in the U.S. and go into O'Hare Airport and see all these lights, and go into like our first grocery store was Aldi, and you go into Aldi and you see all these bright lights and bananas and fruit and chocolate and all this and I'm like, what is going on? This is heaven, it was just quite remarkable, but the challenges for any new immigrants coming to a new country. We didn't have money. We lived in a high-rise apartment in Chicago. Chicago in the early 90s was extremely scary. Still is to some degree. I think we're going to start seeing some cleanup, but it was very dangerous. And all of us were in like a 2-bedroom apartment. So it was very cold. Weather similar to that of Romania. You have 4 seasons. Winters are long and cold. So it was challenging. Our time there was obviously challenging, but we would still go to church. We would have all of that, Sunday's church. Again, mom and dad were very strong believers. I realize right now the legacy that they left, and the deposit that they left into their children, to love God. That was the most important thing to them, and that they left with us, and given us a sense of purpose.
So let me ask real quick, but I do want to go back a second. What church did you guys end up going in Chicago to?
I think the church, the name of the church was called Betania.
Betania.
Bethany.
Mm-hmm.
And the pastor was Luca.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Bethany, gotcha.
He's gone to be with the Lord, but yeah, that was the church that we went to. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Awesome.
So
I wanted to just you mentioned something that rang some bells in my mind. You mentioned that your dad became a Christian, and you said kind of a radical Christian in the sense that he started preaching the word. And this is during communist times, so I want to highlight that is not you kind of did that at your own risk. That's pretty bold. I didn't know that. That's part of your story. So I'm thinking that might have something to do with your boldness, which I want to touch upon a little bit later. But I think the audience must know that during that time you couldn't preach the gospel openly.
True. And I would hear stories, from my dad, where the Securitate, the secret police, would infiltrate the prayer meetings, and
Correct.
They would say, "Hey, unless you give us your family pig or your family cow or some chickens, we're going to report you."
Or turn in the other people that are also coming.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you had to be discreet. You had to do it. But my dad also, like, he stepped out. The faith, that he had, I think, was able to trump the fear that he felt, the faith and love for people. So he would go to the surrounding villages and preach the gospel, and yeah, that was as it is with any communist country, they allow you to practice your faith, but it's a very regulated faith, and it has to stay within the boundaries.
Do you remember that? Do you have, was that something that's like you remember, or is it just stories? Have you seen it or gone with him to these?
No, stories. I mean, that's it. I was too young to remember. I do know going to church on Sundays, that was allowed, you know. But then they would go to other meetings. I know where we couldn't go, and I'm assuming some of those were in different towns or villages where they would do that, and they had to be more secret about it. But you know, I found out later once I came to the U.S. You know, my dad recalled those stories and shared things with us, and you know, not all of them, you know, were were stories that you'd wanna, you know, uh, be a part of, I would say, you know, because some people risked their lives, some people lost their lives, you know, just being bold. And we know the story, you know, of the pastor that ended up getting extradited from his house when the revolution started and how it started. And that was only like an hour away from where we were, in Timișoara. You know, that's how it all started with this pastor that just started having prayer gatherings, and they threatened him, and he's like, no, we're not going to stop. And as he, you know, continued to pray and pray, more people started joining. And then the revolution started in Timișoara and then spread from there to all these other, you know, towns and whatnot. And
Yeah.
eventually Ceausescu lost control.
And ironically, Timișoara is not too far from where you guys are from, and where I was from. It was just a town over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the village life in Bănești and what you remember.
Man, I do have memories. I remember, you know, uh getting assigned to take care of or to watch over the family cow, and my brother and I would go to the pasture, me and maybe an older brother or a younger brother, and you know, during the summer, you know, helping to um you know, plant peppers and tomatoes and picking fruit, you know, just all that, you know, responsibility came at a very young age for anybody living in a village. That was the bottom line. You know, you have animals. You gotta. Every child is an asset. You know, so that's why people had a lot of kids, because it was work that needed to be done. I remember collecting firewood, going into the woods and collecting firewood and bringing it back. You know, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so hard and heavy, and you know, all that responsibility was good. It was good because it instilled in us strength, perseverance, and whatnot. And I also remember, you know, dinners. What did those dinners look like? You know, we would have like a big bowl, the baling, you would call it in Romanian, you know, and you'd have bread that was, you know, 4 or 5 days old, and milk from the cow, and all of us would get a spoon and eat from that because there was nothing else. You know, we were poor. The chicken, you know, was reserved, or any meat, for Sunday meal after church. You know, that was the big meal where you would have soup of the, you know, soup of the they take with, you know, you maybe you get the liver, you get the leg, you get the thigh, you get the gizzard. You know, it was everybody had one piece, and that was, you know, that was something we look forward to because we don't really gather together to have, you know, lunch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The dinner was at night, and it was obviously not a whole lot, but the big meal was after church on Sundays. That's when we would all gather.
So you kind of opened a little bit of a can of worms here in my mind. So just a question for you: where would you guys go shopping there, and where what was eating steak like?
Oh yeah, eating steak, no shopping, no steak. It was, you know, every morning you'd have like a piece of bread and some eggs or something, if you even had that. But they would come once a week. I do remember this. This is from the collective, the regime. You know, they would come with one big sack, and every house would get a piece of bread in the village, you know. And then sometimes the bread was a few days old, sometimes it was more fresh. But you would get one big round bread per household. We were a big house, you know, but we got one big piece of bread. So all the stuff was made at home. I mean, all the noodle was made at home. The bread my mom would bake, obviously, everything like that. And then not only did we have our land that we got to work, and plant our own crop and potatoes. If it was a difficult, spring where you got too much rain or summer, you wouldn't have all of that, or in the fall, if you didn't plant potatoes, you wouldn't have potatoes or whatnot. But you also had land that you had to work that was for the collective, basically, where you are sowing, you are planting, you are harvesting, and then you had to give it away.
It's not for you, right? It
It's
didn't
not
belong.
for you,
Yeah.
not for you. Yeah. So that was quite interesting. But we were very fortunate to have a horse. We were very fortunate to have a cow. And then at some point we had some sheep, and then of course chickens and dogs. So that,
Well,
yeah.
how would you guys go shopping? I mean, I'm assuming there were malls
Well, yeah,
or
we
fancy
had,
stores.
yeah. I think the first time that I went to the city, I was probably 7 years old. And we had a sister or two sisters that were working in Inao. I told you that's Inel's pretty the size of 10,000 people. And so we took the bus on this dusty dirt road and we just jumped on when we went there. And that's when I first experienced stores, like I was like, oh wow. But, there was different stores for different things, but even then it was very scarce.
Yeah.
And I remember this one store uh had like cola and drink and Fanta or whatever. I was like, wow, this is so crazy. They actually have drink. And then there was another one that had potatoes, and everybody had to wait long in line to get potatoes. I remember the minute we got off the bus, you saw these people. I'm like, what are they doing? Everybody's in line. So whether it was eggs or potatoes, they had like a little card that they had to give, to be able to buy potatoes. You couldn't just go and, oh, I need a bunch of potatoes or a bunch of eggs. No, you were rationed too, with how much you could get, so
So
life
that's
under
the reason I
communism.
brought it up because first of all, I was there too. I was being sarcastic when I was saying, where'd you buy your clothes? Because there was nothing. So a lot of people sort of romanticize communism in some ways nowadays, unfortunately. And so I wanted to touch upon, you don't know what it was like. You certainly don't understand. I remember, in the same spirit, you guys are in the village. In some ways, you got to grow your own food. But I was in a city, we would wait in line for starting at 3 o'clock in the morning till the store opened. And then we'd be lucky if we got some meat, even bread many times, milk. That was the only way we could buy it. And once in a while, we'll get it from sort of our relatives from the village. But anyway, there was nothing. I remember going to the store. You look around, there's nothing except like cans. That's all they had to sell. So that's why I was clothes, like designer clothes. What?
No,
Uh,
not designer, any clothes, period. I mean, I grew up on hand-me-downs, from older siblings. Like, it wasn't until, Chicago that I had my first pair of brand new shoes from
yeah,
Paylon. And I was like, wow, I remember that day. But yeah, that's not something, that you have. And the luxury of even candy. It was during Christmas, we would put up a Christmas tree. And I remember that's when I saw my first candy that was, like in a paper wrap. And we had to wait for it until Christmas to be able to get that candy off the Christmas tree. And I'm
yeah,
like, or like a Turkish delight. That was something that was also, you had to,
yeah.
I'm like, that's candy. That was, again, something you had to wait until Christmas to be able to enjoy. So
In an ironic way, though, like we're kind of returning back to the sense that like you guys were making your own food and having a cow and kind of growing some of that food on your own, where now we realize that's a huge value. It's healthier, it's cleaner. In a way, it was probably organic because back in that day, they didn't have all these pesticides they could throw on it because you didn't have money to buy pesticides. So you probably had to so
and,
it's
you know,
ironic.
it's interesting. You're making a good point there. When I first, um, you know, tried, strawberries or cherries here, I felt like they didn't have the same flavor. And I don't know if it was a kid when I was eating tomatoes, and they had so much flavor in Romania, you know, or so much strawberry. Maybe it was just I was a kid, so I was just so much more in wonder and awe over anything, you know, like that. But the aroma was so much more potent.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was, but also the fact that everything was organic, you know, things were not, uh, you know, Monsanto hasn't fully taken over, you know, Romania. So you were eating something that was not digitally modified, you know. So anyway,
Non-GMO, what?
GMO, yeah, that's right.
Everything was non-GMO because
For the
there was no
non-GMO
pesticide.
organic food, correct?
Yeah. But so the reason I was insisting a little bit on this because I think I'm assuming this is a big part of your life, like how you started out, or I should at least say, how did you get from that to where we are today? Um, so you're saying basically like faith was a big part of your family. Sounds like hard work was just ingrained because you were living in a village and you had no other way to do it. You mentioned at one point what would happen when it was raining, I guess. What was the village like life then when it was raining outside or cold?
Yeah, well, I mean, the work still has to get done, number one, you know, but I remember like during the winter months, you know, and you didn't have the luxury of heat, you know. You had to collect the firewood, you had to come make a fire, you had to come wait for the fire. In the morning when you wake up, it's cold, and you gotta if that fire was not going all night, you know, and you gotta be also think about it. You have a family where 3, 4 kids are sleeping in a bed, you know, and you have one, you know, fire place. That's a heater. You don't have like it's not spreading necessarily all over the house like that. So you know, big blankets, thick blankets on to stay warm. But in the morning you'd wake up and it would be so cold. And I remember you just didn't have, oh, let's go and make a coffee or get a hot tea, cup of tea. Everything was slower and took, you know. So same thing when it was raining and you had to do things. You know, you didn't just, oh, let's get in the car, let's drive here or whatever. It all had to be done manually, you know. And then if you're, you know, like in our case, you don't have umbrellas or rain boots that you can just put on. So when I got those first pair of rain boots when I was 6 years old, they were handed out from older siblings. Man, they meant the world to me because I'm like, you know, any kid loves rain boots, but it was like for protection now. For whatever reason, I can go out and actually enjoy, you know, the ground a little better without having to worry about my feet, you know, getting all dirty or freezing or getting wet. We don't have the luxury of paved roads. You didn't have sidewalks like you have here, especially in the village. I know we now had sidewalks and paved roads, but in the village you didn't have that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So I mean, I guess I'm just kind of previewing in the future because boots actually played a huge role back in that time, right? Because the roads were unpaved, like you said. You had to go do things in the yard, and a lot of people probably that didn't have boots, they were using the same shoes year round, whether it was hot or cold, wet or hot, wet or dry, it didn't matter. So they probably wish they had a pair of boots in some cases. So anyway, I just think it's interesting where this story began. And um, okay, okay. So then you guys moved to the States. You mentioned that you sort of got your first pair of shoes in the States. What happened after that? You're
yeah,
now in Chicago, I guess.
yeah. So we're living in Chicago. I, finally was able to enjoy this new life, and I remember going to a Payless, you know, on Kedzie and Lawrence, where we were living in Chicago at the time. The whole family would walk out and just kind of either be picked up by this big white van that would bring us to church, or we would try to walk around. You know, in the winter it was bad. You know, there was a lot of um, we lived in a neighborhood that was mainly Cambodians at the time. So that was not, you know, very safe for us. We would get picked on, you know, a lot and whatnot. But I remember this spring, early summer day, and we all walked to Payless, and we were able to pick out a pair of shoes And I was like, yes, you know, of course I had, uh, my mom telling me which ones would work out better. But I'm like, I really like these ones. I got my first pair of shoes and I'm like, wow. Like I kept on washing them. And for the longest time, I wanted to keep them clean to look brand new. Of course, that never lasts as long as you want it to, but it was my first pair of shoes. And yeah, I must have been 9 years old. And it was special. It was very special, you know, just like the moment when I got to eat my first slice of pizza, you know, and I was like, wow, what is this pizza? Or the first hot dog with ketchup, the first week when we came to the US. And those memories, you know, you can never get out of your mind. It was just a special moment, you know. And yeah, some of us had to wait 8 years. You know, I look at my daughters and I'm like, you have no idea, you know, you have your first pair of shoes and you're not even walking yet. You know, I have my beautiful Mila, you know, I got her a pair of shoes, my little Roma boots, and I'm thinking like, you know, she's not even walking. She's got already a pair of sandals I got her from Jerusalem, you know, a pair of shoes that a friend gave me for her birthday since I'm in the footwear world, and a pair of Roma boots. And I'm like, she's what a blessing, you know, to be able to live in a free country, to be able to have everything like that. Because we didn't have that, but also it taught us the art of appreciation, you know. And when you appreciate things, when you have gratitude, that paves the way for compassion, and that allows you to want to do something meaningful to help others because you knew what it was like to grow up without that. So when you appreciate every small blessing, you know, you want to do something, you want to be thankful, you want to be able to help others. I mean, just try not eating for a day. You know, in the evening you're gonna get like, okay, I appreciate my food. That bread that looked a little crusty and old now is gonna taste a little better, you
It looks
know,
delicious.
the way
So,
it is.
so some of your experience and kind of later on qualities that you built are kind of forged in this hard life that you guys had in Romania, but at the same time beautiful. I assume with 12 brothers that your parents like did what they could to create this family unit. I mean, what you're alluding to. I think I'm beginning to understand better where kind of where you're forged. And then Chicago, like you said, maybe even picked on all of that probably built more character and strength and like kind of like kind of deal like that doesn't bother me, because I see now a lot of that. You're very bold even online, and this has been going on for years. I follow you and you're not ashamed to say whatever maybe not be popular at the moment, and I'm wondering if this kind of built into that from that.
Yeah, you know, the Bible says all things work for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose, you know, Romans 8:28. So I think all those things, all the setbacks, all the challenges, all the, you know, lifestyle living there, like taught us perseverance, you know, but also just believing that the best is yet to come. No matter what situation I'm in, I tell my daughters this, you know, you can be dropped off into a desert, into the poorest neighborhood, poorest country in the world. Everything can be gone. You have the chance to start all over and things will get better, you know. So I think that there's just a perseverance that I learned as a kid because I've faced so many different challenges and living in different, you know, contexts, different countries, you know, different, you know, dealing with different ethnicities and whatnot, and not giving up, man, just fighting, fighting, fighting. And to the point of even marriage, you know, here we are, my wife and I are celebrating, you know, 23 years of marriage this year, you know, and that in itself, you know, fighting, you know, through all of the obstacles that we faced as a young couple, you know, and just you learn to fight for things and to also have appreciation for life, you know, because of those things that you go through, you know, as a kid, you know, when you have 11 siblings and you don't get your way all the time and not everybody gets the best piece of chicken on the table, you know, and but not everybody gets a, you know, a brand new pair of shoes, you know, when they're 1 year or 2 year, 5 years old. Not everybody gets the attention that they need, you know. And so
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, that just builds character. And if you can keep, um, you know, faith at the center of it all, you know, and the relationship with God, I think that that's so important because that allows you to overcome so many things, that you would otherwise uh not not grow up looking at opportunities as those were great opportunities. You get bitter. You get, you know, I've known people that probably, grew up similar to the way we did, and they never want to return to Romania because they hate what Romania did to them, and they never want to go back because that was so difficult for them, and they still have this hate and
Yeah.
anger and bad taste. But I don't see it like that, I don't see
Yeah.
it like, and I love Romania and I love Romanians. And part of the reason why I eventually started Roma Boots because I wanted to help those people back there that we left behind. Because I felt like it was almost unfair for me to be given this opportunity to come to the US to do whatever I could, and not everybody else did. And I'm like, man, I have compassion for them. I have love for them, So all of those things, all of the bad things, have made me a better person. You
Yep.
know, all of those challenges were good and I embraced them, and now I'm like, I'm glad that happened. And it makes me want to speak out for the oppressed. It makes me want to be a voice for the voiceless. It makes me want to, you know, put my reputation on the line and put my whatever
Yeah.
I think I have become on the line and risk it all because I'm motivated by something more than just, making a living. I think the motivation is the most important thing. Is it love? Is it faith? Because if it is not, then why am I doing what I'm doing? So.
Yep. Sam, I don't know if you can share, how did you come to know Christ? Like maybe give us a short version of that. As I know you grew up in a Christian family. Was there a specific moment that something happened where you sort of made a decision, or it was just a gradual, or?
Oh, I actually walked away from my faith, and growing up in a Christian household that was very religious, I I was always pushing the envelope.
Mm-hmm.
I always, I was like, oh man, like being forced to go to church and pray and all of that was good to some degree, but also at some point, living in the projects, um, and finding out, what people are doing there, just being in a wrong environment, I would say, created in me a curiosity to start experimenting, which I did with smoking and then eventually with drugs. Um, so if I could just back up a little bit because this is very critical. This was those formative years, between like 10 and 12, 13, my teenage years did a lot to me that now, I think I've learned a lot from. So if I may just say, we moved from Chicago to Tennessee, and then Tennessee, we didn't have money, so we lived in the project, government housing project. So whereas Chicago was a melting pot of every, ethnicity you can imagine in this third largest city in the U.S., Tennessee, especially Knoxville, Tennessee, didn't offer that. And so while Tennessee was beautiful, hilly, reminded my parents of Romania. It was gorgeous. And it still is gorgeous. But we didn't have money, so we moved to the project. So we had our own house in the government housing project, or our house that we were able to live in, other than a 2-bedroom high rise, first floor house. So my mom and my dad were like, this is a new chapter for our family. And so uh, you had whites and you had blacks and then you had the Romanians. And it was us and then a few other Romanian families came. And so, as you can imagine, we were the target of so much bullying. People had no idea where Romania was even on a map, They didn't know. So they would pick on us, pick on us. I remember we had a Subaru. We had this Subaru that my mom was the first one to start driving, and they would just come and jump on the Subaru and throw these bottles of 40 that they would drink, these thugs, and just throw them against the house, throw them on our porch. We would go out to try to play soccer with my dad, and we would cut our feet up on the glass. My mom, I remember she planted, keep saying I remember because I'm recalling all these things. And so my mom planted all these tomatoes along the side of the house. And while they were still green before they could ripe, these kids would just come and grab them and throw them against the house. I would say the most difficult years of my life in America was Tennessee, living in the projects. And that's when I started listening to rap music, Tupac, became my, things that, music I would listen to early on. And then a kid gave me a Black and Mild, I started smoking Black and Milds, and then from there, I was just getting myself into situations that I shouldn't have. We've had a good friend of mine, Sterling White, Maurice Davenport, got killed, got shot. As young kids, there would always be shootings. These thugs would come and set our dumpsters on fire, and my dad would just, he would just say, "Hey, stick together as a family. Let's stay together. Let's be careful." They would pray every night. We would have prayers at our houses because we were so scared of everything that would happen. They would say, "Let's pray. Only God can keep us safe." But again, through all of that, I was exposed to a lot of things. And as a young kid, curiosity got the best of me. And even in that dark environment, I would go to the Boys and Girls Club. And going to the Boys and Girls Club turned out to be a blessing, whether it was playing basketball or every Wednesday we would have families from the nice part of Knoxville, West Knoxville, that they would come in and they would just volunteer their time, investing in us as, children that were living in the project, and they saw potential in us. And we were introduced to Boy Scouts, which was really cool. I started learning things there. And after that, we were introduced to this church that they would come and pick us up every Sunday and take us to church. And I'll never forget the first time I got to make a Christmas list. It was these families came and they said, "Hey, we really, really want to help you get something for Christmas. Do you want to create a Christmas list of what you want?" And man, that Christmas, this white van pulled up in our driveway with a sleeping bag and with a remote control car, everything I put on my Christmas list I got. That was such a special moment. And in my mind, I was thinking at the time, I'm like, wow, that's so nice of them. I want to help people too. I want to be able to help people one day. And then we were introduced to Habitat for Humanity. And then Habitat for Humanity works on the point system. And we had good grades at school. But because of our grades, we were able to get points faster and we were able to get out of the project. So we finally got our own house. My mom still lives in that house to this day. It's not a bigger house. It was actually a smaller house, but it was our own house that was a little bit further out, more on the countryside in Tennessee, in Halls, and changed schools. And at the same time, while living in the project, like I said, I was introduced to drugs. I didn't experiment with drugs just yet. I experimented with cigarettes, and at one point I think alcohol, but that's about it. I wasn't really doing a whole lot other than listening to rap music. But when I switched schools, I moved from the projects to this all-white school now, just white people. And a friend of mine invited me to spend the night. My parents let me spend the night at his house. And so my sophomore year, I smoked weed for the first time and I got high, and I was like, can't believe, the feeling of this. And that started, what I would call probably my 2-3 years of dark years for me, where I just started getting high. I found out people were spending money on this stuff, and I said, no, I could get it for cheap. Just my natural entrepreneur spirit came out, and I'm like, I could sell this to you guys. I know what the prices are in the projects. You guys are overpaying. So
That's funny. That's funny.
it's true story. And I'm like, I'm not getting paid to get high,
You're
but
not
I
getting
can help.
tipped.
So I ended up starting buying weed and selling weed and getting high for free. And I'm like, man, that just, yeah, my sophomore, my junior year, senior year, we would just get high going to school. Everybody would want to pick me up. We would roll up a blunt and smoke a blunt on the way to school and getting high even during lunch sometimes and after school. And I don't know how I managed to finish with a 3.1 GPA because, oh man, I was staying high most of my last two high school years. And I knew my life was not headed the right direction. Each sibling, as they graduated high school, they would move to Dallas to go to school here. And man, I knew I had to change my life. And so I was actually going to join the Marines. Several of my friends were like, man, it's time to get disciplined. It's time to get disciplined. I knew I needed an intervention. I knew I needed boot camp or something, and I said, I'm going to go to the Marines. And we were all signed up. We were ready to go. And I had a sister that was in school at the time in Dallas and an older brother. And my older sister went to a prayer room at the school and she wrote down a note. And she said, I'm praying for my brother to break the cycle of drugs, to turn back to God, and to come join the school. And she put that note in there. And I'll follow up with that note here in just a second. But my brother visits Knoxville, my brother who was already here in school, my older brother. And I'm like, man, I'm graduating high school and I'm going straight to the Marines. For some reason, he says to me, he's like, you're going to the Marines? We're about to go to war with China. America's about to, this World War III is about to start. What are you doing? And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's what I want to do. And he's like, no. He's like, why don't you come? Why don't you come to Dallas? I'll introduce you to a good friend who I've met before, but he's working for the airlines. And he's like, you could come, you could work for the airlines. And I am like, oh, hard decision. I was like, signed up already for the Marines, me and a few other friends. And I'm like, I don't want to get a dishonorable discharge or whatever, And so, but I was able to get out of it somehow. And I came here, I said, let me just check out Dallas. So summer after I graduated in 2000, I drove my car to Dallas. And even driving here, I remember just driving all night and getting high, being super paranoid. But I came here and I felt like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for me here. And told my mom I cleaned up my act. I was actually on the college campus where they have alumni housing, staying with my brothers and whatnot. And sure enough, immediately I meet people that, are also doing drugs on campus. And I'm like, man, I can try to move, but if my heart's not changing, it doesn't matter. I'll find those people and I'll do the same stuff here. And so I go back. This is where everything changed for me. I was here, I was stealing stuff. I would go into dealers and steal things, clothing. That's what we all did in Knoxville during those drug years, And, it's really interesting that I ended up stealing clothing from the same department stores that I later ended up buying Roma boots. But that's how things worked out, I guess. So October 21, 2000 was when everything changed for me. That's when everything changed. And I ended up going back to Knoxville to visit my parents, to get some stuff, because I was like, okay, I am going to make a change. I am going to move here. I saw that Dallas seemed interesting for me for a couple of months. And I said, I think I could live here, so, and I would like to start working for the airlines, for Delta Airlines. So I went back to Knoxville in October to get some stuff, my clothing, and kind of made the final move. And when I went back, my mom asked me to come to church. And I was like, yeah, I'll come to church. And I went back to church with her. It was a Thursday night. And then I was just like, I can't wait to leave church. I had a friend who had moved from LA, Romanian friend. And he came to pick me up. We left church. He's like, why don't you drive? So I'm driving, and because I think for some reason, I don't know, he had some run-ins with the law. And so as we left church and I'm going to wherever we're going, in Tennessee, you have a lot of winding roads. I couldn't wait to light a blunt, and I bent down to light a blunt. And as I'm lighting up my blunt, my car veers off into the opposite, or into incoming traffic. I kind of went into the opposite lane, and it just so happens that the car that's coming against me is a police car. And I'm like swerving immediately. I'm like, swerve. The police turns their blue lights. I'm like, I gotta run. I had some drugs on me. I had them all would keep them right here in my boxers. And I remember rolling down the window and tossing the drugs out. And I'm like, oh, this guy's gonna catch me. So I run. I realize I can't really run because at this point he's on me. I'm like, so I had to pull over. And I said, God, in my mind, I said, I'm tired of running. Can't run anymore. I said, I can fool my parents. I can fool my family in Texas, but I cannot fool you. And I said, I needed heart transplant, and I need you to help me, And that was the day that I said, I surrender. I surrender everything to you. I can't continue to live this life of paranoia, this life of drugs, this double life. I went to church with my mom to try to impress her, to try to please her, but my heart was never changed. And I said, I want a new lifestyle and I need your help. And a few days later, they had another church service. This time my mom and my dad didn't go, but they had a church service, and I ended up going to church, and that's where I gave my life to Christ fully. And the experience that I had at that church service was nothing short of a miracle. And that's when I said, this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to live for you. And I remember getting baptized in the Holy Spirit at this event, and it was something where I've never experienced anything like that. But I'll tell you, I drove, to church. From church back home, and I was just on cloud nine. I was driving home, and I was like, wow, I had no desire for anything else. I said, I just want to pray, worship, read my Bible. That's all. And I just couldn't wait to get back to Dallas to start Bible school and to start this new life. And I told my parents, and they immediately noticed something was different about me. And I did. I came back. What's crazy is on Thursday, I get arrested. On Saturday, I get saved. I come to Dallas immediately. I apply for a school. I get accepted. I apply for Delta Airlines. I get accepted. I get a job, and my life turned around. On the last day of the year, December 31st, 2000, I come back to Knoxville, and me and my younger brother and my younger sister all get baptized. And the last day of the millennium, and it was like, man, what a difference the last 2 months have made. October 21st was the day that I got saved. December 31st, I get baptized. And then January, I start a new job, a new school. And man, everything started turning around. And since then, I've been living for the Lord. We all have our setbacks. We all face our challenges. But I started this 2-year school. I started this job that would allow me to travel to 55 countries around the world, and for free, for free. And that's where I met my wife, at the same school. She got saved also, moved from Colombia, South America, came to, her background was Catholic, came to Dallas. We met and got married, started a family. After school, I ended up going to Colombia, Cuba, Panama, did everything that I learned at the school basically now had to be applied. So I did this missions thing called YWAM, Youth with a Mission, if you ever heard of it. So I did that. Sure. And then after YWAM, I said, I want to do something more meaningful. Even, we had started a family, and I'm like, I want to do something but I didn't know what and when.
Let me
And
ask you just a couple more before we go into that chapter, because I think, first of all, I had no idea this whole package or story of yours. I didn't know those sort of years, but that's really fascinating because I think a lot of people could learn a lot from this. So you met your wife um, working somewhere, or how did you guys meet?
so while being at this Bible school, it's called Christ for the Nations Bible
Yep.
Institute.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I started that.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, yeah, so I had a roommate that was Finnish from Finland, Helsinki, and I had a roommate from Colombia, Cali,
Mm.
Colombia. And there was this video that they showed. There was a speaker that came from Cali, Colombia, and they showed a video. Cali was like the murder capital of the world with the Cali cartel. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yeah.
And it was, just the narco
The
traficantes and
narcos.
all
Yeah.
these, man, just so many drugs and just all of that. Well, I watched this video basically that they shared with me, this preacher that came from this church in Cali, Colombia. And the church was basically had like a 3-day prayer, all night prayer. And it was the first time since they could remember that it was the first weekend that there were no murders. There was no murders happening that weekend. I was I would say just touched by this video and astounded that God can do that when people gather together and pray. And somebody courageously said, "Hey, I am going to call all the churches, you know, in the world, in the Colombia, to gather together and pray." And at this soccer stadium, which I later visited. And so they filled up the stadium, and they just prayed and worshiped God. And the video was called Transformation, but I was so moved by this video. And my friend Pacho was like, "Yeah, that's the church that I'm from." Well, a semester later, Alejandra, whose dad got saved during this revival, you know, um, she comes to the school because the church kind of sent her there. Say, "Hey, she just became a Christian. You can go to Dallas." They had a relationship with a school in Dallas, and so I was introduced to her, and so we
At
started
Christ
dating.
for the Nations.
Yeah, yeah, yep. I
I
started.
didn't know you went to that school, but I know the school. I remember when I was in Dallas, we drove by it, and then I know some other people that went to that school. So I didn't know you
Um,
were alumni of that.
yeah, we had like 10 of my siblings graduated from CFNI. Yeah,
No,
yeah. So
wow, I didn't know that. I believe you guys had some kind of school in Romania. Is that true? Your brother or something?
yeah, so Cornell, my oldest brother, actually started Christ for the Nations Romania in Cluj.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so he ran that for a while, for well over a decade.
Yeah. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
some friends that were telling me. But and then anyway, there's probably your family probably there's a I know your brothers are entrepreneur too. I know at least Abel from Romania has a restaurant or a cafe and anyway.
Definitely.
But
Yeah.
interesting. So you're alumni of that. You mentioned something earlier about bilețel, a ticket that your sister wrote. Is that comes in later or you didn't forget about that one?
And,
I want to
no,
close that
right
loop.
now. Yeah, thank you so much because that was a cliffhanger that I forgot about, but that was very interesting. That while I'm at CFNI, I Christ for the Nations, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, picks up a note. She's in the prayer room and picks up this note, and it says, "If you're reading this, pray for my brother Samuel, who's into drugs and needs to be set free, basically, and that he would make it to Dallas or he would come to the school." And so they would put all these prayer requests into this big bowl, and then people would go into a prayer room and open up these, you know, and she read it and she's like, "Hang on." My wife met my sister, my girlfriend at the time. Oh, she was my wife, Alejandra. She had met Anna actually even before she had met me. And so she opened that up and she's like, "Oh, this is Anna." And then found out that, I was her brother. And here's my wife reading this. And she tells me about it. And I was like, "Yeah, that's me. I used to be into drugs." And, so I got to share my testimony with her, but it's so cool to see how, you know, God listened to the prayers that were going out of this prayer room and brought me there because everything in me wanted to join the Marines. I wanted to, I can't imagine what my life would have ended like, had I gone down that path. But it was really interesting to see that, of all people that pick up this, it's my girlfriend at the time, or became my girlfriend, then became my wife, but
So how did that ticket sort of stick around? Because I assume the ticket was written a few years
couple years
before.
before. So it was a big pull of tickets. So anybody can just pick up. You don't just throw them away, right? It's
Really?
like yeah. So anybody can write down a prayer request that they want and just put it in there. It could be 2 prayer requests in there,
Dude, you
and
can make a movie out of this. I mean, I can see it. So you're telling me your future wife picks up the ticket.
says, please pray for my brother Samuel, who's deep into drugs, that God will save him and bring him to Dallas.
So did she bring you this ticket when she saw it, or
Oh,
you
she
just?
told me about it. Yeah. I don't know what I've done with her. If I kept her, she put it back in the bowl, but she showed it to me at one point. And I was like, yeah, true story. True story. Yeah.
That's like a movie, because I could see the pause in the ticket till you pick it up, and then what happens in between. Interesting, interesting. Wow, I didn't know this. I honestly, I don't know. I thought whatever things went very straight line from there to Roma Boots, but it's interesting because it's probably all. So you went to Christ for the Nations. You're yes, YWAM. I'm familiar with it. Actually, when we went to Tanzania with Charity Cup recently, we work with YWAM there. So anyway, that's really cool. Okay, so you got married, started a family, and then I assume what happens next?
Well, prior to getting married, so I did YWAM. And after doing YWAM, I ended up doing my outreach in Cuba, Colombia. Being in Cuba, man, I remember just being there and recalling the same spirit, the same environment that I experienced as a kid in communist Romania. I'll never forget, on every corner, there were just people, kind of like police officers taking notes. You felt just that oppressive spirit, and you felt that control. And it was really fascinating to be there, because I'm like seeing old cars and buildings kind of falling apart. I'm like, man, this is what communism produces. It was really something else. And then after that, we would wait in long lines to go to the villages where we kind of hung out with kids, played games, preached the gospel, doing stuff like that, as discreetly as possible. But it was really, really cool. My experience there, the poverty was something else. I remember beans and rice is what we would eat all the time. Beans and rice and coffee. And the internet, you could only use the internet at the Capitolio, which was the Capitol building that was built by the Americans at some point, but that was quite an experience for me. Cuba was like, wow. But I knew I wanted to do that. I loved being there. I loved serving the kids. I loved even waiting 4 or 5 hours, to get put in these tractor trailers with doors in them. That's where everybody would just crowd in to go to the villages, to go, that was their bus, their transportation system. And so while I was there, I was thinking to myself, I would say that's where the seeds for Roma were sowed, at, in Cuba. Because I'm like, I wish I could just do this all the time. But I also knew that God gave me a brain, and I'm like, I want to be able to do something meaningful with my life. And I think after Cuba, yes, we went to Panama, and I reached out to my pastor here in Dallas. Now, I told you I got a big family, and half my family is going to this church. We're tithing there, and we're giving our money there. And I remember telling my pastor, hey, I need some money. We were just in Cuba and Colombia. I need, some support. And he's like, nobody sent you to Cuba. Man, it broke my heart. I said, wow. I said, I need help. I need like some financial help because I wasn't working or anything during that time. And when he said that, I was like, man, I knew then that I got to figure out a way to support myself while doing what I love and helping people. And I would say that's where that challenging time, that rejection from the pastor was when I said, I got to do something to where I can make a living and, support my family and also do what I love. And so, after Cuba, after Panama, that same summer, uh, I came back to Dallas. And then my wife ended up going to Toulouse, France. She was gonna study there, or she started studying there. She's French Colombian. My brother Emmanuel was the first one to get married. He got married that summer. Then my brother Cornell got married that summer as well. Two siblings married within, I think, the span of a few weeks. And then I was starting DBU, Dallas Baptist University. So I was here. I'm like, I got to come here. I took all the credits from CFNI and I'm going to study communications. And my wife, my girlfriend at the time, had like this long distance relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, this is too hard. You got to come here. We got to get married. Something has to happen. And in October of that year, I went to Toulouse to give her her application so she could also come and start school. And when I went there to Toulouse, and I love Toulouse, I ended up getting her pregnant. I got my wife pregnant, and at the time she was not my wife; she was my girlfriend.
Right. Wow.
Yes, I did, and she calls me. I had no idea she was pregnant just yet, but in October, end of October, she reaches out and she's like crying. She's like, I'm pregnant. It's positive. And I was like, oh, it's going to be a blessing. That was the first words that came out of my mouth. I said it's going to be a blessing. And that was a very, very difficult time because I knew again that I probably was able to fool my parents, my family, and I couldn't fool God. And God, in His grace, exposed the sin that I was living since the summer of that year, because that's when it started after YWAM. We started sleeping together. And I called my pastor and I told him, and he was very, very upset. And I called my father-in-law, who was, I'm just dad at that time, and told him what happened.
Wow.
And then I flew to Tennessee to tell my mom and dad. And my God, the wrath of Alexander Bistrian. It was very, very hard, man. It was very difficult. I remember that week was just so tough. And my dad was very harsh with me. Very harsh. I remember telling him, he's like, what? How can you do this? And, I'm in McGee Tyson Airport in Knoxville, Tennessee, coming back, and I'm just like feeling like I just want to die at this point. I'm feeling so overwhelmed. And you know how it is in the Romanian community.
Yeah.
That religious spirit
I
is
mean,
front.
that's what I was thinking. That's really bold of you to go to your
Yeah.
pastor, to go to your parents and kind of like face this.
Yeah, well, I had to, because my pastor in Dallas told me, he's like, you got to clean up your mess here. You got to be responsible. He's like, now that you did that, you got to, he gave me some advice. And he's like, you got to do the right thing. He's like, when you make one mistake, don't make another mistake. Interestingly enough, many people suggested an abortion. And I have friends within that same Romanian context that did that so they could save face, so they could pretend because they were the son of a pastor or the son of a religious person. And my wife is not my wife at that time. She's my girlfriend. Starting a new school, free school in France because she's French Colombian, so she can study French in France for free. Toulouse, just starting this, pregnant. Conventional wisdom or not conventional wisdom, but I would say modern day, wisdom would say abortion. You have to do an abortion. And people have said that, and I was like, no, I don't care. Like, we are going to have a child and we're going to raise a child together. And I told her, she's going to be a blessing, or it's going to be a blessing. I didn't know it was going to be a girl at the time. And man, after here I am in McGee Tyson Airport. Let me just pick up where I left off there. And I'm like, oh, I want to die, Lord. Help me. Why did I do this? But I felt a glimmer of hope. My dad calls. I don't take his call. And then I hear his voice. I click the voicemail, and it says, hey, I know I was really harsh with you, because that shocked me. I did not expect that, and I raised all of you in a way where, hey, you save that for marriage, and you get married and he's like, I know I was hard. I like Alejandra, and Alejandra's a good girl and this, that, and the other, and I know that this child is going to be a blessing to many, to you and to many. And so take care of them. Man, it's like this huge weight just lifted off of my shoulders. And I just felt so good. It felt like the grace of God just came over me like it did when I got saved. I just felt like I was on cloud nine, not 6 feet under anymore. I want to be just like soaring. And it was really cool. I was so excited to have Alejandra come, which she was already planning. I told you I went there to get her the application for DBU, and she was already planning to come. And I'm like, oh, we're going to get married. And so she came, and December 6th is the day that we got married, actually, that same year. So you had 3 Bistrians getting married in 2003. This was 2003. So we had a little wedding here, and then we went to Colombia, Cali, Colombia, and did wedding service there, and started life. I started working, 2 jobs, and then while I was working at laying tile in the morning, and then at night working for Chili's restaurants, did all that I could. Then in that context, and then my wife calls me to tell me that her water broke, and Ilona, our daughter, was born. She was born in June of 2004, and to think that that she would become such a blessing to so many, and currently working for a pro-life organization called Human Coalition, and this baby that should have been aborted now is, such a pro-life advocate, been on Daily Wire and live action, her story has gone out there, and whatnot. It's just really interesting to see God doing that. But I needed a job, something more than, what I was doing. I was going to DBU, I was working 2 jobs, and so eventually I got a job working for Neiman Marcus. So I don't even know. I've kind of gone everywhere with the story, but I helped.
No. It's actually fascinating. The story is amazing. Seriously, you're a great storyteller for one. That's why I didn't
Oh,
even interject.
well, so if I can continue down the same line, then so I need a better job. I was working at Chili's. I was laying tile, things that I didn't like, and my wife just had a baby, and I was still going to DBU. Well, back home in Knoxville, I had friends that were ODing on drugs. A good friend of mine actually had just died on drugs, and I'm thinking to myself, man, I want to help these people back there. I just felt this responsibility to help them. And so I brought several of my friends to come to Dallas from Knoxville. And in fact, one of my friends, I even let him live with me. So I have a brand new baby. I have a brand new marriage. And I have this guy that's addicted to drugs. And I said, hey, come live with me. I want you to break away from that lifestyle. And he came. And together, him and I went to North Park Mall in Dallas. And we went to Dillard's, the place where I used to steal clothes from and apply for a job. And then we went to Nordstrom's and applied for a job. And then we went to Neiman Marcus and applied for a job. And Neiman Marcus said, hey, we need some seasonal help. We need somebody to unload boxes and, to empty the truck in the mornings. And, if you guys can come, it was just a seasonal job. And I went, both of us. And I think I could have gotten a better position right off the bat if I would have been by myself. But I was with my friend Russ, and my friend Russ looked rugged and just beat up and whatnot. So they said, okay, this is what you guys can do. But God had a purpose in all of that. And 2 weeks later, we both got our first paycheck. And I went to Russ's father or stepfather, uh, gave him some money so he can move out. So he had just moved out right when he got the job at Neiman Marcus. He had just moved out. And I lived probably about 25 minutes. And on the way home, on the way to work, I would go to Russ's apartment, pick him up, and go to work at Neiman Marcus, unload the container. And I came to pick Russ up, and we just got our first paycheck. He took that first paycheck and bought drugs with it. So when I came to pick him up, I'm knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking at his door, and he never comes. And I'm worried. I'm going to be late for work. I'm banging on his door. Russ, I'm calling him. Russ never comes. And he just never, ever came to the door. I was so worried. I called the police. I said, but I had to go to work. I went to work. And then finally, after work, I go back to Russ's house to find out what's going on. And he informed me, that he didn't come. He went out. He took that first paycheck. He bought drugs. And I realized, you can try to help people, but people need to be willing to help themselves. And at some point, you gotta make a decision that this is enough. Enough is enough. And I made that decision, and when I got pulled over by the police that one time. And I think Russ was not ready to make that decision. He ended up getting fired because he did that a couple of times. So a few weeks later, he gets fired. A few weeks later, I get promoted. And then I get promoted again. And then I get promoted again, to where finally I'm a department manager of the #1 Neiman Marcus store, and we were #1. North Park store was actually the #1 store in the nation. And I just felt like God was opening up all these doors. There was a lot of favor, and I just felt like I was meeting people. Met George Armani, who just passed away, by the way, a few weeks ago. Met all these great people, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is awesome. But I'm also traveling to Romania and Colombia during the summers, and I'm seeing so much poverty. I'm seeing what my siblings are doing. One started a Bible school, another one started an orphanage, others moved there to help out. And I'm like, man, I love all these opportunities that I have at Neiman Marcus, but this is not what my heart really wants to do. I want to give back. I want to help people. And I was always looking for the opportunity where I could combine my love of fashion with philanthropy to give back. My siblings in Romania are like, hey, you work in fashion, you work in clothing, send us some clothing. We need clothing, at the orphanage or whatever. I'm like, even with my 30% discount at Neiman Marcus, I couldn't afford the clothes to send clothing to Romania. So I kept thinking to myself, I want to do something more meaningful, because I felt like, the direction my life was going was great from a worldly standpoint, because I'm getting promoted. Eventually I could become a merchandise manager. I can have my own store, but I knew that inside there was more. I felt a sense of emptiness, and I wanted something more meaningful. I really did. And I'm like, man, there has to be something else. There has to be something else. And so I finally, during this time, by the way, I'm flying for free because I took a 5-year leave of absence with Delta Airlines. A story for another time, which is remarkable. But just to summarize it in 30 seconds, I started Delta the same week that I started CF&I. In fact, I had to miss the first 2 weeks of school for training at Delta Airlines. And then the same week that I graduated CF&I took a 5-year leave of absence with Delta, because Delta needed people to take leave of absence. They needed people to quit because of September 11th. I worked at Delta during September 11th, which is a story in itself. My dad was flying that day from Romania to Dallas.
Really?
A crazy story to begin with. He thought he was in Dallas when he, in fact, was in Paris. And yeah, and so I don't want to go down this rabbit trail, but it was crazy. It took me 2 hours or an hour to convince my dad that he was in Paris. I'm like, Dad, I'm actually at the airport. You were there. Look around. You tell me what terminal you're in. They're like, no, I'm here. Stop playing games with me, or I'm going to call one of your siblings to come pick me up. He's like, you you like to make these jokes with me. He's like, I'm tired. And like, that's what happened. He's like, well, we ate, we took off. I had a glass of wine. We landed, and here I am. Come pick me up. I'm like, no, okay. You took a little nap and you landed back in Paris. I said, look around you. What language are they speaking? He couldn't tell. I said, what terminal are you in? He said 2F. I said, okay, that's Paris. Because I was confused
Wow.
for a while. So anyway,
That's
going,
that's hilarious. And
yeah, so I'm working for the airlines, during the same time that I was at CFNI, the same week that I graduated CFNI. I got these leave of absence because they were getting rid of people. They were closing down the terminal here at DFW. And I was like, perfect. I was the first person to jump on this leave of absence. They said, if you have at least 2 years, which I had exactly 2 years, you could take a 5-year leave. And I said, perfect, with full flight benefits, where my wife, my daughters, my parents would fly for free. I'm like, yes. And so again, my time, I ended up doing YWAM. I told you after CFNI to apply what I had learned at the school. So only God could write such a beautiful story. I'm flying for free during this time, and whatnot. And then here I am working for Delta for Neiman Marcus, again, flying for free during the summers to go to Romania and Colombia. Because some people are like, well, how did you travel so much? Well, because I was flying for free, so I could afford that because it didn't cost me anything.
that's amazing. I
But
mean, well, that all ties together.
again, it was all divinely orchestrated. That's the only thing I can say. And so I'm traveling to Romania, I'm traveling to Colombia, I'm doing all of this, but I knew my life, there was something more, and so I'm like, God, what should I do? So my leave of absence comes to an end after 5 years. I'm working at Neiman Marcus. I'm running this department store at North Park Mall, #1 store. And I'm like, man, this is probably the time for me to make a change. And so I said, well, Delta calls me. They said, for you to maintain your flight benefits, you need to come back or it's done. I'm like, well, I have a pretty good career right now. Do I go back? But I also felt like it was the time that I needed to make a change. And so they said, we have an opening in Hawaii, Honolulu, or in Columbus, Ohio. And I'm like, well, I
Wow.
want to do Hawaii, of course, but that's as much as I want to do that. I'm like, maybe Columbus is a better option because I had this beautiful house at the time. We were in the middle of a recession, 2008. Neiman Marcus was, not doing too well, as nor were the airlines, but for some reason I ended up going to Delta. They still needed somebody at that time. And it was the beginning of the recession. I'm sorry. So they weren't able to immediately have to do massive layoffs. So I went to Columbus, Ohio. I'm like, I'm closer at least to Dallas. And I also, during this time, wrote a book. And in that book, Goodbye Transylvania, my transition from communism to capitalism and whatnot. And I remember in that book, I said, I want to do something for the Romanian children. I just don't know what and when. And it was that period in Columbus, Ohio. My wife didn't like it. She would come back to Dallas. We had a house here. So I'm like, I had an apartment in Columbus. I was doing a lot of soul searching. I really was. And it just all kept leading back to doing something for the Romanian children. And so I finally ended my time there, my 9 months. I would have stayed there longer had Delta needed me to stay longer, but because of the economic collapse, they were actually willing to let people leave and with flight benefits. And they were willing to match the years that I had worked for them. So after 2 years working for them while I was in college and 5-year leave of absence and then going back to Delta for 9 months, they were willing to combine all those years and match those years with flight benefits. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. And so I was able to leave Delta, get a severance package, and have those full flight benefits for the next, what was it, about 7 years, 8 years. I jumped all over it. So I came back. The minute I got back to to Dallas, I get a call from Neiman's. We found out you're back in town. Do you want to come back? I'm like, yes, I'll come back. But I knew in my mind I wasn't going back to stay. You know, I'm like, I'll go back and help out. But I was thinking at that time of my book a lot and the things that I was writing in there and which were things that were really
Do you
meaningful
have
to me.
that book anywhere published or?
Yeah, it's available. It's available on barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, you know.
Is it Audible at all? Mm, it's not an
No, no, it
audiobook.
needs to be now that we have AI actually to go ahead and do
You
that. Like,
should, because we
yeah,
want to. I'll if you can send us a link. I mean, maybe people might want to read it. Send us a link. Maybe we can have some people want to
yeah.
buy it.
It was self-published at the time, so it wasn't. It's not like a amazing book, but you know, I did put my story in there, and you know, maybe I should do you know, a new version of it or whatnot. But yeah, so I did. I wrote a book during that time, which was again, it was very meaningful, and it was kind of my transition to where I am. Neiman's calls me back. You know, I go back to Neiman's. I knew in my heart I was going back for a short season. And what do you know? Blake McCoskey of Tom's Shoes is launching Tom's and Neiman Marcus. And I got the chance to meet him. I got a chance to talk to him and ask him about, hey, why aren't you doing something? Or are you doing something for kids that live in cold and white climates? I shared with him that I have siblings that live in Romania and how rain boots would be so, you know, practical for those kids living in cold and wet climates and essential footwear like that. The canvas shoes I knew couldn't do a whole lot. And so he didn't seem too interested.
So
Told me he's
just so the audience understands what Roma does. Not Roma, sorry. So this guy Blake is the CEO of Tom Shoes, which has a model and kind of pioneered this model of if you buy a pair of shoes, they give away a pair of shoes to like impoverished countries, right? But they are
correct.
canvas shoes. They're like things that you can wear like more in warm climates, right? Does that
Yeah.
summarize it right?
So Blake was on a trip. I want to say Big Brother, some trip like that, on a show that he was in Argentina, and he ended up going into these villages, and he saw these kids wearing these shoes. They're like peasant shoes, basically. Apagata, it's what it's called, made of canvas.
Mm-hmm.
And basically took that shoe and created this buy one, give one model. So you buy a pair, we give a pair. And that's it. So he started this shoe line called Tom's, which stood for Shoes for Tomorrow. And so he created Tom's Shoes. And in 2003, I mean, in 2006 is when he started. In 2009, when I'd come back to Neiman Marcus, is when he was launching it at Neiman's. A few months after I'd come back, and it really took off. It really took off for him, and I was very inspired by this concept of buy a pair, give a pair away. And I'm thinking to my days in Cuba when I was doing missions work there, and I was helping these kids, and I'm like, wow, I could make a living and help those living in poverty. So I want to do the same. Seeing that he wasn't willing to go down that route of doing rain boots, he was sticking to the canvas shoe. I'm like, I could do the same with rain boots
And it's
because I
interesting that you
knew.
had this fashion background, which obviously,
Yes. I had that. I had the background of growing up in poverty, getting my first pair of rain boots and free travel. So I was like, man, I need to do this. But I didn't have money. I had $5,000. I had $40,000 in credit card debt, student loans still that I was paying off from DBU. I had another child, my daughter Emma was born in 2007. So now I have Ilona, I have Emma, you know, and, you know, you got to be able to take care of my family. We're in the middle of a recession, you know, and I'm like wanting to start a business, but I knew that I needed to do it. And like I said at the beginning of this podcast, I said, what's motivating me? What's motivating me? Because if it's love, it doesn't matter what, it'll succeed, you know, even in during a recession, I'm gonna be able to help people. But if it's not love, if it's greed, if it's building a name for myself, even though it may succeed seemingly, it's gonna crash and it's not gonna bring glory to God. And I remember saying, I want whatever I do to bring glory to God. And I want whatever I do to be good for others. So, you know, for the glory of God and the good of others, basically. And that's why I started Roma Boots.